Good morning, everyone. On behalf of SEF CRNTS, I welcome all the participants and our speaker for today, Mr. Mangesh D. Kulkarni, to the Talk 5 of webinar series on electron microscopy. To begin with, I would like to give you an overview of SEF IIT Bombay. It was inaugurated by our late ex-Prime Minister, Shri Morarji Desai. Instrumental methods of analysis form an indispensable aspect of any research and development program. The Department of Science and Technology, DST, has set up sophisticated analytical instrument facilities, SEF, in different parts of the country. The main objective of setting up these facilities is to provide guidance in acquisition of data using sophisticated instruments. SEF IIT Bombay has several analytical instruments and provides measurement services to IIT Bombay users and to users from other colleges, universities, national laboratories, and industry. Professor Anil Cotton Tarail is currently heading our SEF CRNTS department. The current slide shows the list of instruments funded by DST, in which 3 of the electron microscopes have been highlighted. The one at the bottom is an upcoming facility, an FIB, which will be installed soon. This slide shows list of instruments which come under central facility funded by IIT Bombay. The current slide shows us the instruments of specific interest to this webinar series. We have 3 transmission electron microscopes. One of them is a conventional TEM and other 2 are field emission gun TEMs. They have different analytical capabilities, like the 200 kV FET TEM has EDS attachment with it, and 300 kV FET TEM has EDS, STEM, and EELS attachments to it. Among the scanning electron microscopes, we have an environmental SEM with an EDS attachment. We also have a field emission gun scanning electron microscope with EDS, WDS attachments. All are located at SEF CRNTS. We have created a LinkedIn account for SEF IIT Bombay. We would be happy to get connected with you via this mode too. The brochure of webinar series on electron microscopy is uploaded in this LinkedIn account. This slide shows the staff of SEF CRNTS. We would be happy to welcome you at SEF and help you with sample analysis. Talk 5 in the webinar series on electron microscopy is on the basics of energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy EDS and wavelength dispersive X-ray spectroscopy WDS. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker, Mr. Mangesh D. Kulkarni. Mr. Kulkarni is associated with SEM, TEM, EDS, WDS products since last 22 years and is currently working as a country manager with India office of Oxworth Instruments UK. He has also been involved with installations, demonstrations, trainings, applications and sales of SEM, TEM, EDS, WDS, EBSD products and has earned significant experience on these product lines. In this talk, he would explain the basics of EDS and WDS analysis techniques being used with electron microscopy. I would take a moment to request the participants to share your feedback. The link for the same will be posted at the time of question and answer session. If you have any questions related to the subject, please type it in the question and answer section. Please mention your name before the question. We will try to take it up at the end of the talk. So let us now commence today's webinar on the basics of energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy EDS and wavelength dispersive X-ray spectroscopy WDS. Over to you, sir.
So thanks for the introduction, and I thank participants for joining, and I would like to thank Professor Anil and Aradhana and their entire team for inviting me for today's webinar. So I would be covering mainly about the basics of EDS and WDS technique available on electron microscope. I'll be touching upon electron microscopy. I guess the audience has already gone through the electron microscopy webinar, so they are up to the speed of to know the scanning and transmission electron microscopes. So first thing first, what is electron microscopy? So all of you know that it is fundamentally very similar to light microscopy. In light microscopy, we use visible spectrum to illuminate the sample, whereas in electron microscope, we use electron beam, more so electron with much lower wavelength. Both these forms of microscopy uses lens to focus the beam on the sample. In light microscopy, we use the glass lenses, whereas in electron microscope, we use electromagnetic lenses. But the key difference between these two microscopes is the resolution limit. Now, resolution is defined as the shortest spacing between the 2 points in a sample that can be independently resolved. As you can see here, there are 2 black spots. If you use electron beam with much lower wavelength, you can distinctly distinguish between these 2 particles, but the wavelength is longer, then you will not be able to resolve them properly. Okay, so this results in a light microscopy having the resolution limit close to about 250 nanometer, whereas if you use 60 kV as an accelerating voltage, you get 0.003 nanometer of the wavelength for electron beam, and you can resolve or achieve the resolution limit of 1 nanometer on electron microscope. Okay, and there are 2 forms of electron microscope. One is a scanning, and another is a transmission electron microscope, and you can compare the ray diagram very well with optical microscope. In transmission microscope, we use a sample which is very thin, less than 100 nanometer thickness. The electron beam passes through the sample and it carries the compositional or structural information of the sample, which you can image using a CCD camera. Whereas in scanning electron microscope, the sample is a bulk and you can scan the surface of the sample and you can generate the images using secondary and backscatter electrons coming out of it. The accelerating voltage which is used on transmission microscopes is ranging between 60 to 300 keV, whereas in scanning electron microscope, it is limited to 30 keV. There are new forms of electron microscope which are called as focused ion beam electron microscope, and I think SAFE would be, I think this FIB is under installation at SAFE. So in addition to electron beam in FIB, you have one more gun, an gallium gun, which you can use to mill the surface of the sample and you can see what is beneath the sample. So FIBs are normally used to prepare the TEM samples. So in scanning electron microscope, the beam actually rasters on the sample, as you can see here, and the electrons are generated. If you acquire the secondary electrons, you can form the secondary electron image. The scanning rate at which beam raster on the sample and the scanning on which the monitor scans, they are synchronized, so you can get one-to-one correspondence between the raster scan and the image what you see on the monitor. So this slide is very familiar to you. This shows when the beam interacts with the specimen, what are the interactions happening. You can see the electrons which are coming out. These are secondary electrons, backscatter electrons. There are light coming out of the specimen. Some of the beam passes through the sample and carries the compositional information, but also there are X-rays coming out of the specimen. And in the EDS and WDS technique, we make use of these X-rays to generate the information. So these X-rays are characteristic to the particular element or the atom present in the specimen. because they are having the specific energy which corresponds to that particular atom or the element present there. You know how the wavelength and energies, they are related to each other. Energy is inversely proportional to wavelength. Now we acquire these X-rays, and when we measure the energy of this X-ray, we call that technique as EDS, or energy dispersive spectrometry. And when you measure the wavelength of that X-ray, then that technique is called as wavelength dispersive spectrometry. Okay, so you can see here why we call that as spectrometry, because you can, metry is you measure something, spectro is you use the EDS spectrum to measure, and you measure the energy using the EDS system. So this technique actually carries many names, such as energy dispersive X-ray spectrometry, energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, energy dispersive X-ray analysis, X-ray microanalysis, EDX, EDXS, XEDS. There are various names, but throughout this presentation, we will be calling this technique as EDS technique. Many times I find many users, they simply call this technique as EDAX. Okay. Now EDAX is a wrong name because it is a company name. So I request all of you not to say EDAX. You can just say ACM-EDS or ACM-EDX. So on the right hand side, you can see the EDS spectrum and also the distribution information, which is shown in a live mode. So when you collect the X-rays, you actually collect the EDS spectrum. It consists of two components. First is your background, which is also called as continuum, and another is characteristic X-ray, or the peaks coming out of your sample. And both forms an experimental spectrum which you can use to analyze quantitatively or qualitatively to get the weight percentages. Now let's see how these two component forms. So many of you would know the structure of an atom. It has got nucleus and there are shells around the atom. These shells carries electrons. So they are named as K shell, L shell, M shell. And there is a formula which decides how many electrons can be accommodated into every shell. So K shell can accommodate 2 electrons. The formula is 2n square, where n is the number of the shell. So K shell can carry 2 electrons, L shell can carry 8 electrons, M shell can carry 18 electrons, and so on. Okay, and higher the atomic number of the atom, the greater is the gap between these energy levels. So let's see how the background is generated. Okay, here I have taken an example of a silicon atom. The atomic number for silicon is 14. So there are 2 electrons present in K shell, 8 electrons present in L shell, and 4 electrons present in M shell. Okay. So what happens when the beam falls on the sample or when the electron beam passes through the atom, it actually decelerates or slows down, and they change the direction due to the electric field present inside the atom. So let's see how it works. So the electron beam comes down and they change this their direction, they slows down, and during this interaction, some of the X-rays are coming out of the sample. These are called as Bremsstrahlung or breaking radiations, and then they form the continuum or background in the EDS spectrum. These radiations are coming at a random, hence electron can have any energy right from 0 up to the applied or incident energy. So this is the first component of the EDS spectrum. The second component are the actually characteristic energy lines. Again, the same silicon sample. When electron beam comes and they knocks off the electron from the K shell, and as a result of that, the atom become unstable. Now atom try to stabilize, and the electron from L shell jumps into electron from K shell. Okay, and during this transaction, some of the X-rays are coming out, and these are called as silicon K alpha energy or silicon K alpha X-ray. Okay, and then you can see that you have a peak at corresponds to the silicon K alpha energy position. Similarly, the electron from L shell is knocked out. Electron from K shell is knocked out, and electron from M shell replaces the electron into K shell, and the energy which is coming out, and that is called as silicon K beta energy. Okay, So again, you see the peak at position of silicon K alpha, K beta. Similarly, the electron from L shell can be knocked out using the electron beam, and electron from M shell replaces the electron into L shell. As a result of that, the energy which is coming out is called as silicon L alpha, and you can see them nicely in the spectrum. So this is how the characteristic energy lines are generated, which is the second component in the spectrum. And then finally, you can have a resultant spectrum, which you can see here, which contains background as well as energy lines in form of peaks. So here you can see the chromium, nicely chromium K alpha, K beta, and chromium L lines as well. Okay, let me just get the pointer. Okay, so you can see here the chromium K alpha, K beta, and chromium L lines and different element energy lines present here. Okay, so there is a minimum excitation potential required to excite these K, L, and M lines. So if you draw a graph of excitation potential required against the atomic number, then you can see that higher the atomic number, you need much greater potential to excite K lines, or L lines, or M lines. If you take an example of tin, which is having atomic number of 50, and if you just find out the excitation potential, then you need at least 30 kV to excite the K line of tin. Okay, and as the atomic number goes on increasing, you still need more and more potential, much higher than 30 kV. But we have seen in scanning electron microscope, the kV is limited to 30. So as a result of that, higher the atomic number, more than say 50, you will not be able to see the K lines of the sample, but you mainly see the L lines or M lines. Okay, so there is a thumb rule that your SEM kV should be at least 2 to 3 times of the energies of K, L, or M lines. So this is shown in a synthesized spectrum here. Now iron K alpha carries the energy of 6.4 kV, and we have applied 20 kV as an accelerating voltage into scanning electron microscope. So this 20 kV is more than enough to excite the K lines of K alpha of iron, and you can see nice K alpha, K beta, and L alpha for iron. If you reduce the accelerating voltage to 15 kV from 20, then you can see that the excitation to K line goes down, and then intensity of K alpha line goes down. And if you further reduce the kV to 10, then the intensity further goes down. And if you reduce to 5, you will not be able to excite the K lines, but you can still see the L lines. And if you reduce the kV to 3, you can still excite the L lines, and you can do the measurements using this L alpha line of iron. Okay, so there is a very important concept which I request all of you to know this, and many of you would already know. There is something called as interaction volume. Okay, now interaction volume in 3D is the volume inside the sample or a specimen which gets influenced due to the electron beam falling on the sample. So here the 2D representation, you have the electron beam falling on the sample, and you can see the pear-shaped interaction volume. The electrons which are just 10 angstrom below the surface gets, comes out in form of OJ electrons, and you can image them. The electrons from 50 to 500 angstrom below the surface can come out as secondary electrons, and you can image them. And the electrons, backscatter electrons are coming down little deep within the sample. Characteristic X-rays are coming out from deep in the sample, and continuum and secondary fluorescence are coming out further deep into the sample. So when you actually put a spot on the image and you feel that I am trying to analyze the area just under my spots, but it is not so. The X-rays are coming out from little deep. We say that if you apply 20 kV as an accelerating voltage, then the excitation volume is about 2 micron by 2 micron. Okay. Now here we have shown two circles, one in blue color, another is in yellow color. Because this excitation volume depends upon two things. One is your accelerating voltage, but second, it also depends upon the density of material present in the sample. So for high density material, the interaction volume is smaller. So then you can see the excitation volume is limited to this blue circle here. And in low density material, the interaction volume is quite large. So the interaction volume or the area, what you can see under this yellow circle, is the area which gets influenced due to the electron beam in a low density material. Now we have shown here this, for silicon, this is a Monte Carlo simulation of interaction volume for silicon at 20 kV accelerating voltage. You can see the interaction volume, which is deep down to 0.3 micron, sorry, 3.5 micron. And when you reduce the accelerating voltage to 5 kV, then you can see for silicon, interaction volume gets limited to just 0.3 micron. So it reduces from 3.5 micron to 0.3 micron when the accelerating voltage is reduced from 20 kV to 5 kV. So your accelerating voltage highly affects the interaction volume generated inside the sample. And second, we will see the density, how density affects this interaction volume. Again, a silicon at 20 kV, you can see the interaction volume is deep down 3.5 micron, whereas in nickel, which is a high density material compared to silicon, at 20 kV, you can see interaction volume is limited to less than 1 micron. So density of material also affects the interaction volume. Again, a simulation of interaction volume for iron material for accelerating voltage 12 kV, 7 kV, and 3 kV, and then you can see how the interaction volume changes. At 12 kV, the interaction volume is 550 nanometer deep and 800 nanometer wide, whereas on 7 kV, the width reduces to 300 nanometer, the depth reduces to 200 nanometer, and at 3 kV, the width reduces to 100 nanometer and depth reduces to 80 nanometer. Okay, this is how when you change the accelerating voltages, reduce it, the interaction volume reduces. So what is the best condition to achieve the best of the spatial resolution of analysis is if you can use 3 kV as an accelerating voltage, then your analysis resolution is much better compared to 7 kV and 12 kV. And how it results into your imaging information. So here is the mapping or distribution information for a nanostructure sample having different layers. And you can see the information, mapping information on 20 kV and mapping information obtained on 7 kV. In 20 kV, you know the interaction volume is quite wide. So as a result of that, the signals appears to be mixed with each other. Whereas when you reduce the accelerating voltage to 7, the interaction volume also reduces and you can get very nice edge resolution in the mapping information. So you can see nice layers of silicon, silicon oxide, and carbon, aluminum, copper, and gold. Okay, so ideally, if you reduce the accelerating voltage, you can obtain much better analytical information from your sample. And that is the reason why field emission SEMs are getting very popular these days. So what are the basic components of acquisition? If you want to acquire the EDS or the X-ray spectrum coming out of your sample, there are 3 components which we use in our system. First is the X-ray detector or the EDS detector, which collects the X-rays and converts the X-rays into electrical signal. This electrical signal is then given to an amplifier, which are technically called as pulse processor. So they process the X-ray pulses coming in from the detector to them, and finally you have the software. The output of pulse processor is given to the software, which nicely displays the EDS spectrum. And essentially this is microanalysis, so you can put a very small area, you can put the beam on a very small area on the sample, and you can find out the chemical composition of that particular area. Okay, so let's see the EDS detector in detail. Now this is the heart of an EDS system. It has got a small opening here from where the X-ray enters. So this area is important because it carries the important components of the EDS detector, as you can see here. It begins with an collimator assembly. This assembly ensures that the parallel beam of X-ray enters the EDS detector, and it actually filter out the X-rays coming in from the SEM chamber geometry and other components in the specimen chamber. It follows by the electron trap. Now, electron trap is actually a physical magnet. It creates a magnetic field, and this field is mainly used to deflect the very high energy electrons which enters along with the X-ray into the EDS detector. Now, you have many backscatter electrons coming out of the sample, and they carry the energy which is very similar to incident beam energy. So these backscatter electrons are deflected using the magnetic field, and then they are avoided because they actually induce a lot of noise into the EDS spectrum. So they are filtered out using electron trap. Then comes the window. Now this window is also a very important component of the EDS detector. Now EDS detector has got a sensor which is always kept in a vacuum environment. Okay, so behind the window you have the vacuum, but here, you know, this detector is connected to SEM specimen chamber. So in chamber you either create a vacuum or you vent out to change the specimen. So this area goes to atmosphere and you start evacuating again. So window actually isolates these two regions, vacuum regions. So it maintains the vacuum inside the detector, and so this is a very important component. And this window is extremely thin because it must pass very low energy X-rays like boron X-ray or even beryllium X-ray. So this window is extremely thin, and we use polymer window as a material to isolate the vacuum between the two assemblies. And just behind the window, you have the crystal, which is actually a sensor which receives the X-rays and convert that X-rays into the electrical signal. And then we have the FET, which is connected to the sensor, which is actually the first stage of amplification. So many of you would have seen the old EDS detector with a DVAR where you put the liquid nitrogen. So those detectors were Sealy detectors. But nowadays, the modern detectors use silicon drift detector or SDD detectors. Their construction is quite different compared to the old Sealy detectors. So let's see how SDD detector works. So there is no lithium into this SDD detector. They are just the silicon, either P-type silicon or N-type silicon. So you have a large cathode here, and the X-ray enters through this cathode into this sensor. And there is a blue color anode, a small anode, which is shown here, and that anode is directly connected to the FET. There are rings which are kept around the anode, as you can see here, and every ring is fed with a voltage called as drift voltage. Okay, so as a result of that, there is a potential path which gets created in this crystal. Let's see how it works. So your incoming X-ray would produce electron-hole pairs. The electrons would travel towards the anode, the hole towards the cathode, and then you have the electrical signal, which is equivalent to amount of X-ray received in the sensor. So let's see how it works. So this drift voltage actually creates a potential path for diverting the electron towards the anode. This potential path is shown in a yellow color here. And let's see when X-ray enters the sensor, and this is how the electrons are diverted or drifted towards the anode. Hence the name silicon drift detector. Okay. Now when you compare these SDD detectors with the old Sealy detectors, what is the advantage? That we get very less noise compared to old Sealy detectors in the new SDD detector. This noise mainly comes due to the capacitance between anode and cathode. Now in the old Sealy detectors, we used to have a large anode. So, and you know, in any capacitor, capacitance would depend upon the area of the capacitor. So large size anode would result in much higher capacitance effects in the old Sealy detectors. Now in the new SDD detectors, the anode area is made very small. So the capacitance effects are brought down drastically. Okay, that's one difference. Second difference is that since there is a lithium induced into the silicon, lithium can be drifted out at much higher temperature. So this crystal was cooled using liquid nitrogen, and they were cooled to liquid nitrogen temperature. However, since there is no lithium in the SDD sensor, there is no need to cool the SDD sensor to liquid nitrogen temperature. You can, because there is no lithium there. We just cool this SDD sensor to -40, -50 degree, mainly to reduce the reverse current flowing between cathode and anode. Okay, now let's see how you measure these X-rays coming out. You can see there is a capacitor connected across the FET. Now this capacitor is charged and discharged, which creates a voltage RAM, which is then used to generate the electrical signal from the incoming X-rays. This incoming X-ray creates a voltage step as it is shown here, and at the same time it also induces the noise on the RAM, which also you can see here. Okay, Now, these voltage steps are measured as X-ray energies in the pulse processor, and the noise on the RAM decides the peak shapes, whether it is a sharp peak or a broad peak. Thereby, it also decides the resolution of the particular peak or the spectrum. As you can see here, the noise on the RAM along the voltage steps generates a nice Gaussian shaped peak. Okay. Now, this noise is averaged during the pulse processing. So there is a process time which is measure of how much average is applied to this noise. Higher the process time, better is the noise averaging, sharper are the peaks, and better is the resolution. Okay. Shorter the process time, poor is the noise averaging, broader are the peaks, and poor is the energy resolution. And you can see here how the shapes of the peak, with long process time, you get a nice Gaussian shaped peaks with much better resolution here. But with short process time, you can get a broader peak, which is not good for quantitative analysis. And how it reflects into EDS spectrum, you can see here two peaks, one in yellow color, another is in red color. Now the yellow color is having much sharper peaks compared to the red one. So shorter the process time, the peaks are broad, and poor is the resolution, as you can see here in the red spectrum. Longer the process time, the peaks are sharper and better is the resolution, as you can see in the yellow spectrum. So which process time you should be using for which application? So if you are looking for much higher throughput and speed of analysis, where you are really not worried about much better spectral resolution, mapping is one of the application where it actually needs maximum throughput, or mapping is a count hungry application. It needs a lot of counts, so you can use much shorter process time. Whereas if you are interested in having the complex quantification, or you want to optimize for low energy analysis, so you need a much better spectral resolution, so you can use longer process time such as 5 or 6. Okay. Otherwise, for routine analysis, you can use process time between 2 to 4 for your general applications. So what is the FWHM or EDS resolution? Now, traditionally, EDS resolutions are always expressed on manganese K-alpha line. And there is a reason behind that, because when the EDS detectors are produced in the factory, those detectors are not always mounted on SEM to test their performance. So there is a radioactive source, which is iron 55, and this radioactive source is just held in front of the EDS detector, which emits a very nice line, which is a manganese K-alpha line, and that is why the EDS detector performance is always specified at manganese K-alpha. Okay. So what is full width half median? If you are just getting 10,000 counts in your manganese K-alpha line, then if you reduce the counts to half, say 5,000, so what is the width of your peak at 5,000 counts? This width decides your energy resolution or EDS detector resolution. The modern detectors now, these days, they produce a resolution of less than 127 EV on manganese K-alpha. Now, lower this number, the better is the resolution. This is an important thing to remember. Okay. So you can see a nice spectrum coming out of your EDS system, and you can notice that the EDS detector tries to see or collect almost all the energies of X-ray at a time. So you can see chromium K-alpha, you can see iron K-alpha, you can see titanium, you can see zinc. So EDS detector looks for all the elements at a time. So it is also called as multi-channel analyzer, because you look for all the elements at a time. So what you can get out of the EDS system, obviously the first thing is qualitative analysis, where you just name or label the peaks automatically. So most of the EDS system has got very strong auto-identification algorithms, and these algorithms find out the peak positions of various K-alpha, K-beta, L-alpha, L-beta lines, and when all such energy lines are present, then they name the peak or label the peak as, say, chromium or iron or titanium. So this is done by the EDS system. User need not worry too much about it. So qualitative analysis is the first output of EDS system, and then it comes to quantitative analysis, which is very important. Now, quantitative analysis is a comparative technique wherein you compare the intensity of your unknown sample to the intensity acquired from a standard sample. Okay, and this is not just a simple comparison. You got to apply the matrix corrections to it. Now, what are the matrix correction or matrix effect? These are the inter-element absorption effect. So when there are different elements present in the sample, there is always absorption of one element on the another element. So these are inter-element absorptions or matrix effects. So you have to apply the matrix corrections to your quantitative analysis. So how it works? You have the EDA spectrum, then we apply the filter least square fittings. So first we use the top hat digital filter, removes the background, then deconvolute the peaks and use the peak fittings, that is try to use fit the peak from the standard sample to the unknown one, and then find out the apparent concentration, then you apply the matrix corrections, then you get the elemental weight percent. So this is a very complex algorithm or the complex process. So as you have seen here that the beam rasters on the sample and you can see the corresponding image. These days these images are digital image, and then what we do is we collect the EDA spectrum from every pixel, and that gives us another information which is called as mapping information or distribution information. So in this sample you can see the black areas here, that is basically an aluminum, and you can see the much brighter area, they are the titanium, and the substrate is silicon. So you can study the distribution of a given element all along the image, which is called as elemental mapping. Okay, so how mapping works? You basically create a energy window. For example, for titanium K alpha, you create a window, and whatever the X-rays are coming out into this energy window, you collect those X-rays and plot them as the titanium signal, and that is how you get this distribution of titanium all along your SEM images. Many times there are peak overlaps. So if you create an energy window having peak overlaps, then essentially you see the same mapping information for different elements. Now here you can see the sulfur and lead, they are overlapped with each other, and if you use this energy window to collect the X-rays, then essentially you can see the same mapping information in sulfur and lead. But we have this TrueMap algorithms in our software, so we apply the deconvolution, we remove the background, and then we separate out those peaks and show you different distribution information for sulfur and lead. Okay, so these are the new techniques available. And we go back to our previous slide. So we have said that if you analyze the energy of the X-ray, then that technique is an energy dispersive technique. But when you measure the wavelength of those X-rays, that technique is called as wavelength dispersive spectrometry. Okay, so if you compare these two techniques, actually WDS technique is much older compared to EDS technique. So WDS technique was available first, followed by the EDS on the SEM. We have seen EDS is a multi-channel analyzer, whereas WDS is a single channel analyzer. WDS measures one wavelength or one element at a time. WDS is almost 10 times more sensitive to EDS. So it is used for typically trace element analysis where the concentrations are below 0.01 weight percent. WDS spectral resolution is also much better compared to EDS. It is 1/10 of the EDS. So typically spectral resolution is in between 10 to 13 eV, whereas EDS we have seen the spectral resolution is 127 eV. So WDS resolution is almost 1/10 of the EDS. Now, because of the detection or detector used in WDS detectors, we get much better high sensitivity for light elements, and the peak to background ratio for WDS detectors are very good, and which can be used nicely for element analysis and mapping. So this is how WDS differs compared to the EDS system. Why do you need the WDS detector on the SEM when you have the EDS detector? You still need WDS because there are some of the overlaps which EDS detector cannot resolve. For example, you have sulfur K alpha overlapping with moly L alpha or even the lead M line. Like that, there are many overlaps which EDS detector cannot resolve. So you need a EDS detector on the SEM mainly for the very fast analysis for the major elements, and you get much broader overview of the content of the sample. And then you need a WDS. So if you have the overlaps or you want to analyze the minor element or trace element, then you can use WDS where EDS detector is not doing a good job. So for high resolution analysis, for high sensitivity quantitative analysis, you use the WDS system. So actually in practice, we use combination of EDS and WDS on the SEM, which makes the whole setup as a full-fledged analytical SEM, which is very much compared to electron microprobe. So as we said, the spectral resolution of WDS is much better compared to EDS. So you see here the yellow is the EDS spectrum, which is much broader, and there is a sulfur and moly. Now these two peaks are just 15 eV apart. So EDS detector cannot resolve them, but a WDS detector can distinctly resolve them as two different energy lines or peaks. And when you separate them, you can easily measure them and you can find out the content of moly and sulfur using these energy lines. So the heart of the WDS system is the detector itself, and WDS detector is a WDS spectrometer. It's a complex mechanical geometry. The X-rays from the sample or different wavelengths enter these detectors and they fall on the diffracting crystal. Now you have collection of X-rays or collection of wavelengths coming in. So what crystal do? They basically diffract this wavelength, and only one wavelength is made to fall on the EDS, the detector used inside this spectrometer, and that is how you separate out the wavelength and measure one wavelength at a time. So this is how the WDS detector works. In reality, you can see on electron microscope, you have the EDS mounted like this, WDS mounted like this. They both have same takeoff angle, so you can simultaneously do EDS as well as WDS data acquisition. Here you can see in the ray diagram how the X-rays coming out of sample, they falls on the crystal, and only one wavelength is made to fall on the detector. So the principle what we use in WDS detection is again the Bragg's law. So many of you must be knowing this, n lambda is equal to 2d sine theta. Now here the d is actually the interatomic spacing of diffracting crystal which we use inside the WDS spectrometer. And theta is the incident angle, and there is a goniometer arrangement inside this WDS detector where crystal moves at an angle of theta and detector moves at an angle of theta plus theta, that is 2 theta. So there is a theta 2 theta kind of movement of crystal and detector in the WDS spectrometer. There is a very important concept in WDS technique which all of you should remember is something called as Rowland circle. Okay, so when the WDS detector is fully focusing type, then sample, crystal and detector, they form one circle which is called as Rowland circle. And in a fully focusing type of these WDS geometries, the distance between sample and crystal and distance between crystal and detector kept always same. Okay, and here the theta is the incidence angle. So this is the fully focusing type of WDS detector geometry. So there are still two kinds of geometries available. One is Johans geometry, wherein you see you have electron beam falling on a sample, the X-rays are coming out, they are diffracted using crystal, but they don't get focused on the detector. So though these three components are on the Rowland circle, in Johans geometry, the X-rays coming out of crystals, these are not focused on the X-ray detector. Whereas in Johansen geometry, the X-rays coming out of the specimens, they are diffracted, only one wavelength is separated and they are focused on the X-ray detector. So this is a fully focusing type of geometry, and we use this kind of geometries in our WDS detectors. There are different diffracting crystals available. We use mainly LIF, PET, TAP and LSMAT, these four crystals to get the analysis range from boron to uranium. Now if you see LIF 200, every crystal has got a different D spacing, and thereby we use one particular crystal to analyze a range of elements. Okay, for example, LIF 200 is used to analyze calcium to germanium. and TAP crystal is used to analyze oxygen to silicon, and LSM-80 is used to analyze boron to oxygen. Okay. Now these LIF, PET and TAP, they are naturally occurring crystals, whereas LSM crystals are the synthetic crystals. Now, if you want to extend the range, you can add the fifth crystal like LSM-200, which allows you to measure even beryllium. So analysis or detection range of EDS and WDS is almost the same. There is no change in the element detection range of EDS and WDS. Both can nicely analyze from beryllium to much higher than uranium. So what is a detector used in this spectrometer? Now we use gas-based detectors. There is a first detector called as gas proportional counter, which uses the P10 gas. P10 gas is a mixture of 10% methane and rest is argon. And this detector is very sensitive to low energy or X-rays coming out of light elements or low atomic number elements. And then we use sealed proportional counter detector, which is filled up with xenon gas and it is sealed. And this detector is very good for high energy X-rays. And these two detectors are connected in tandem, one after another. And sometimes we use a combination of signal detected by both the detectors. So how this detector works? So there is an anode wire which is kept in the detector, which carries much higher voltage. And then you have either P10 gas here or a xenon gas here. Your incoming X-ray would ionize the gas, and these ions are accelerated towards the anode wire. And during this acceleration, they further ionize, and you get much higher output signal, which is compared to the amount of X-ray enters the enter the WDS detector. Depending upon the orientation of spectrometer, there are different geometries. There is a first geometry called horizontal, where spectrometer is horizontally connected to the SEM specimen chamber. There is an inclined geometry where the spectrometer is connected at an angle on the SEM chamber. And there is a vertical geometry where spectrometer is connected in a vertical direction on the specimen chamber. So these days, nobody uses horizontal geometry. There are inclined geometries and vertical geometries available, and they both have a distinct difference, which is the output of a detector. Now we have seen that there is something called as Rowland circle, where the sample, the crystal, and detector has to lie on Rowland circle in a fully focusing type of geometry. So if I just expand this, now 0 is a position with which the detector is always on the Rowland circle position. Okay, but if the sample is mounted away from the Rowland circle, then you see the detector output drops drastically in the vertical spectrometer. Now in WDS, the measurements are always against the standard sample. So if you measure the standard sample, wherein your sample is always at the Rowland circle position, but if your unknown sample is not exactly at Rowland circle position, and if it is away, then detector output drops, then you will always have an error in your quantitative analysis. Okay, so in the vertical spectrometer geometry, you will be forced to have the specimen always on the Rowland circle. You really cannot work away from it. Whereas in inclined geometry, your detector output remains more or less same. So even if you mount the sample, which is say 0.5 millimeter away from your analytical working distance or the Rowland circle position, your detector output still remains the same. So inclined geometry is insensitive to working distance. So you can put your sample slightly away from your analytical working distance or the Rowland circle point, and you can still use the WDS and get the quantitative analysis. So this is the main difference between inclined and vertical spectrometer. So let's compare these two techniques. Elemental range, as I said, there is no difference in the elemental detection range. Both can detect from beryllium onwards. But in terms of quantification, EDS is accurate to just 0.1 weight%, whereas WDS can be used to find out the concentration of 0.01% present in the sample. Spectral resolution of WDS is much better compared to EDS. We have seen that. In terms of speed of analysis, EDS is faster because it is multi-channel analyzer. It looks for all the element at a time, whereas WDS is single channel analyzer. It measures one element at a time, so it is slower compared to EDS. You will find there are many EDS systems around, but WDS systems are not many because of the complex WDS detector. The cost of the WDS system is much higher compared to EDS system. Light element sensitivity is very good for WDS, but not so good, just moderate sensitivity for the EDS system. Again, the quantitative analysis, the formula is the same. It's a relative technique. You have to measure the intensity from the standard sample. For example, if you want to analyze iron using WDS detector, then first you should measure the iron from the pure iron sample. You must measure the intensity and then compare that intensity with the intensity measured from your unknown sample. And you compare these intensities, again apply for matrix corrections, and then you get the quantitative analysis. So here for a garnet sample, we have done the measurement using just EDS plus WDS, and we finally compare those results with the EPMA. Okay. So when you use EDS for the measurements, now the sodium concentration is such that it is beyond the detection limit of your EDS detector. Okay. Similarly, the manganese concentration is also quite low, so EDS is not able to find out those concentration accurately. Whereas other element is still fine because they are more in the bulk quantity. So if you rightly use the combination of EDS and WDS, then you can find out the concentration of sodium correctly. You can also find out the concentration of manganese correctly. And finally, the result you can always compare with EPMA, and you get much similar result using EDS and WDS combination when you compare the result with EPMA. Okay, so you get almost the same sensitivity as EPMA when you install the EDS and WDS on the scanning electron microscope. So before I conclude, one must remember when we say major element, we mean the elements having concentration more than 10 weight%. Okay, and the minor element means the concentration in between 1 to 10 weight%. And trace element is the one having concentration less than 1 weight%. So with EDS, you can find out the concentration close to 1000 ppms, whereas with WDS, you can find out the concentration close to 100 ppms. Okay, so that is what I wanted to cover in this session. Thank you for listening. Now I can take on the question.
Thank you, sir. So the first question is from Shiba Anandi. What are the longer and shorter processing times in seconds? Is there an upper and lower limit for the processing time?
Now, when we say processing time 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, they're actually digits, but they corresponds with certain time constant. Okay, so you can simply imagine a longer process time is the longer time given for the processing, which means processing is better. So if you want to know the seconds, then I can email exactly what is processing time 5, what is processing time 6 and 1 and 2 and things like that. I can email those data, but they are specific to our EDS system.
Okay, sir. Thank you. So the next question is from Mr. Hari. He would like to know, is there any open source software available for EDAX analysis?
Yeah, again, I would like to correct you because in one of my slides I said, never say EDAX. It is a company name. So you can say either EDS or EDX. Yeah. So our softwares are available for offline processing. However, the data, EDS data which you want to process, that should be acquired using our EDS system. So yes, the software is available for offline processing from our side.
Okay. So the next interesting question is from Dr. Rohini. She would like to know if oxygen is there in the sample and the compound is deposited on FTO or ITO substrate. Is it reliable to quantify such samples for compositional analysis? What precautions to take for oxygen containing samples?
Yeah, so we know that oxygen normally doesn't exist as an element in the sample. It is always combined to form oxides. So in our quantitative analysis, when you have oxygen peak coming in the spectrum, then you know that you have to go for oxide analysis. So in the quantitative analysis, you have to choose the combining element as an oxygen. Then oxygen is stoichiometrically combined with all the elements present inside the in the sample, and then you get the oxide weight percentages. So oxygen oxide analysis is possible using the EDA system. It is stoichiometrically combined.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So the next question is from Mr. Someshwar Chaudhary. He would like to know that he has radioactive, that he would like to have radioactive element detection, and his samples are soft wood-like material which are dry powdery. Which spectroscopy technique should be suitable for his samples?
Now, if you are using radioactive samples, they are actually not suitable because they keep giving out the energies which are detected by EDS or WDS detector, even if you don't excite them using electron beam. Okay, but in Atomic Energy Institute, they can still use our EDS and WDS system if you make your own kind of a sample handling arrangement and sample mounting arrangement. You can still use EDS and WDS detectors. Those EDS detectors are special because there the window is not a polymer window, it is a beryllium window, because you need much higher protection to EDS detector. So they are possible in a certain customized environment.
Okay, sir. So the next question is, sometimes along with the EDS of the desired elements, we do get other elements also. And why do we get that?
No, you get that because they are present in the sample. Many times, we really don't know the history of the various element present in the sample. So EDS detector, when it detects them, and our auto identification routine, when it labels the peak, then I think you are almost sure that that particular element is present in the sample. Okay. However, there is something which is called as pulse pileup or some peak or pseudo peak. For example, if you are acquiring the EDA signal at much higher count rate, then there always a possibility that two X-rays enters the detector simultaneously, and they would be counted as energies are added to each other. Now these are called as pseudo peaks or some peak or pileup peaks. And if this peak unfortunately coincides with any energy line, then even the software recognizes this as another particular element present in the sample. So there are pulse pileup corrections available in the software, especially when you acquire the EDS signal at much higher count rate, you have more chances of pulse pileup. So you apply those pulse pileup corrections, and finally these pseudo peaks are removed from the spectrum, and you get a resultant spectrum which consists of elements which are there in the sample. So you have to first check whether if you are using very high count rate, and if you are not using very high count rate, if you are using a count rate of 10,000, 20,000, then whatever the peak which is coming out and is labeled by the software, you have to believe that that particular element is present in the sample.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir, the next question is from Dr. Saptarshi. He would like to know that we know that there are many elemental analysis like EDS, CHNS, XPS, etc. He would like to know which one is the best for elemental mapping and why.
Now it depends, I have shown a slide of interaction volume where you see different signals coming out, and they are coming out from just below the sample surface or just little deep from the sample surface. So what exactly you want to find out in your mapping information, then you can use either WDS or other EDS, other techniques for that. So it really depends upon what is it that you are looking for.
Yes, sir. So the last question is from Dr. Sahu. He would like to know, EDS can detect only elements, or can we detect compounds by EDS like in XRD?
No, EDS is elemental analysis technique. So it analyzes only inorganic elements. Okay, from beryllium onwards, or these days even windowless detector can analyze lithium. So only from lithium onwards up to californium, these are the elements which you can detect and analyze using EDS system. However, compounds cannot be analyzed using EDS detector or EDS technique. For that, you have either XRD or EBSD systems to analyze those compounds. So it is only the inorganic element analysis.
Thank you, sir, for answering the questions. On behalf of CEF CRNTS, I would like to thank Mr. Mangesh Kulkarni for an interesting talk on basics of energy dispersive spectroscopy and wavelength dispersive spectroscopy. We are really grateful to Mr. Mangesh Kulkarni for answering the questions. I would like to thank our head, Professor Anil Kottantharayil, for his continued support in this webinar series. And last but not the least, I thank all the participants for attending this webinar and making this event successful. A link for the feedback form is shared in the question and answer section. Please fill the form. Your valuable inputs are important to us. The registration link for the next webinar is now open on our website. The upcoming talk is on defect structure of germanium-111 on epitaxial gadolinium oxide 111 on silicon-111 heterostructures grown by molecular beam epitaxy by Krista R. Chianti. I request you all to join us for our next talk. Once again, thank you all for making the webinar successful. Stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you.